Welcome to Sheth Marketing Academy. This lecture is on brands. As you know, brands are great intangible assets of companies, whether those are product brands or corporate brands. There is an agency that gives you a financial value of a brand called Interbrand Agency. There is another one called Brand Finance, and these two companies look at the value of a brand independent of the product. And for example, number one perennially always has been Coca-Cola Company, where the product and the company brands were synonymous. And of course, Coca-Cola now offers many more things than just Coca-Cola as we know it. And the brand of Coca-Cola as a corporation, as a brand, independent of the product line and businesses, is already valued into billions of dollars. And this is true for newer brands like Google, also true of the brands like Facebook, etc., all the digital media, social media brands. Brands, therefore, have been the core passion of marketing. In fact, marketing is supposed to communicate the products that companies create through its branding, positioning, and properly promoting it, properly communicating it. However, as you would expect, any concept that is core to the discipline or the practice will have different viewpoints, different perspectives. The most common and the most contrasting perspective is, can you take a brand and apply it or use it for other products than for which it was primarily associated or primarily designed? And there are debates in this area. Some believe that a company should be primarily a house of brands. This view that the company should have distinct brands for different product lines or distinct segments in the marketplace even, is a very strong prevailing view in CPG companies, the consumer packaged goods companies. It is somewhat prevalent in the consumer electronics companies, and it may be prevalent even in some industrial companies. Although in industrial companies generally, the brand is not a product brand, but it is much more a corporate brand representing the reputation, the quality, the trust, whatever it is. And in that particular case, you have the opposite view, namely, should you be a branded house? So, should you be a house of brands or a branded house is a very nice way of framing extreme polarity. In between, there are so many views, namely that you can take the brand internationally as it is, or you can have the brand extended into certain areas which are compatible with the product line with which the brand has been historically associated, such as, for example, you can take the brand like Arm & Hammer, from toothpaste to a primarily some sort of a odor killing device. It's all household products kind of a notion. I have therefore made this presentation to articulate that brands do have multiple lives, and hence the title of the presentation. Do brands have 9 lives? And I would like to talk about that in this particular lecture. My own view is that brands do have, yes, they do 9 lives, just like a cat, and probably more than 9 lives. The traditional mythological belief is that cats are very versatile. They rebound constantly, and people just imagine cat has died and the cat comes back again. But there is also a belief that there may not be a 10th life of a cat. I think brands have 10th, 11th, nth life it's indefinite, my view. So what's the similarity between a cat and a brand? We know already cats are independent, they are resilient, very versatile, they can do multiple things, and they're highly adaptable to different environments. So let's go into each one of them. Brands are always independent of their product. And this has been conclusively evidenced by brands like Nike that began primarily for sneakers, as I used to call in my generation, or athletic wear. But today Nike is basically a lifestyle brand. A brand like Tata, which is an industrial company in India, began primarily in the steel business at one time, went into locomotive. It sounds like it's a corporate brand, but they've gone into consumer products. They have Tata Motors, for example. They have gone into, for example, Tata Tea, and they absolutely believe that you should have a branded house. And you may have sub-brands by each product category, but that's not as appropriate. And hence, they do have the debates, as you would expect, whether the new Tata Nano car should be called by a different brand. They acquired Jaguar and Land Rover. Should those brands be kept? They went into the hotel business, hospitality, and that's called the Taj brand. A lot of debate whether they should put that as a Taj or a Tata brand. So even within a company, it's a highly diversified, very large, probably a $90 billion corporation, truly global now, and they also have the debates. Samsung, which began primarily as a memory chip maker, totally B2B industrial, has gone from industrial to consumer products. Today Samsung is very well known for its television sets, also for its cell phones, and it puts the name Samsung everywhere. So brands are usually independent of the product, as the interbrand ratings and the brand finance ratings clearly indicate. They are very resilient and bounce back. And we have seen this thing. Buick, we all gave up on Buick as an automobile. It's like my grandfather's car. But Buick, with proper restyling, has come back. They began to win the J.D. Power and Associates Quality Awards. Even Consumer Reports began to accept as one of those cars that they would, endorse it or rate it positively. And Buick has revitalized itself. More importantly, as we will see, Buick now is one of the best-selling luxury cars in China. How many of you remember Bisquick? This is a product I remember by Pillsbury. It's basically a dough in some fashion, and then you make biscuits out of that one. It basically was something when we had the days of homemakers and breadwinners, and most women made most of the products we consume, food, at home rather than buy prepared, packaged, branded foods. Bisquick was declining, but today Bisquick has come back almost like a retro brand. Young generation is very interested in learning what they can do with this Bisquick powder or a flour. And they have actually older women on the call center, they have advising younger women or another set of group of women to do different things, providing them recipes, etc. Just like Pillsbury has done very well with the cake mixes, for example. So here is a brand that gets revitalized. The best turnaround story recently has been Hyundai, or Hyundai as they call it, like Sunday. The brand is a Korean brand. When they introduced it, was a cheap quality brand. In fact, people used to laugh at this brand, very much like Yugo. You might remember YUGO, which was a car that came from Yugoslavia, totally stripped down, but also not reliable. Car was lousy, the dealers were lousy, etc. But today, Hyundai as an automobile has suddenly become the darling of the industry, gaining enormous sales growth and market share, especially at the expense of Japanese car makers. And Hyundai as a corporation has just bought out Kia Corporation's Kia Motors, and therefore now they have a two-brand strategy. Probably Hyundai will go from the cheap, inexpensive, unreliable car to more of a luxury brand. So yes, brands are very moldable and therefore they are very resilient, which is my third point. I think we have underestimated the versatility of brands. You have this one school of thought that if you have a brand like Just Jeans, there is nothing else you can sell except jeans. Or if you have a brand like Cinnamon Bun, then you cannot take liberty either with cinnamon or with bun. But my view is that I think brands can be easily liberated. Brands are more versatile than products. Products may have life cycle, brands don't have a life cycle. And here is an example where Arm & Hammer as a brand has gone into so many different product applications. Starting with odor killing in the refrigerator, to a cat litter box, for example, to actually a toothpaste, even a detergent. And they're riding on this theme of natural because the ingredient that is primarily involved, baking soda essentially, is pretty good. Baking soda can not only bake things, but it can be a good odor killer, and it can be a very good, in fact, a bacteria killer. So you have an odor killing on the one hand, and you have the traditional baking on the other hand, and they have done a fantastic job of expanding product line, so that's very possible. My recent favorite, and we'll talk about this later on, is Pabst Blue Ribbon. These used to be in US primarily the working class, primarily factory workers in the beer drinking industry. Pabst was not high-priced premium. But today, Pabst Blue Ribbon has been totally revitalized as an avant-garde brand, similar to many of these, microbrewery brands. Like, there are so many microbrewing brands, and it is getting traction back again. And we'll talk about later on, when we talk about the taking brand to international, how Pabst Blue Ribbon has gone so successfully in China market. My favorite also is a company called Wipro. It's an Indian company. It began primarily as a distributor of vegetable shortening, but for the masses, not for the well-educated class, where people would buy Crisco brand in America, or a Dalda, D-A-L-A-D-A in India, Unilever brand, when margarine was popular, or hydrogenated oil essentially. And they began to buy wholesale, make it into small quantities, and sell it on the street essentially through vendors. Then they went into, of course, manufacturing the vegetable shortening itself. But then they went into toilet soaps, because toilet soaps use a lot of vegetable shortening. But the biggest breakthrough came when they decided to also go into IT industry by distributing printers, by distributing servers, for example, and by distributing computers. And they've used Wipro brand in their PC product, in their printer product. And then they went globally, primarily in the IT services industry, outsourcing. It is probably $5 to $6 billion product line just in the IT services. They have the consumer products. They have gone into baby products, for example. They've gone into a bunch of products, but every place they have the same Wipro logo, which is a quality assurance. By the way, they also own a hydraulics cylinder business. Brand is Wipro, so brands are versatile. You can grow from industrial to household, from components, materials, in fact, to finished products, as these companies have pretty much shown. And similarly, Amazon is my more recent example, the same way. Amazon today is no longer just an online bookseller, but it turns out to be, it can do anything it wants to be. Brand is independent of the product. And the last one is, like cats, brands are very adaptable to changing market or changing environment, changing context. And we have seen this contextual change for a brand that is historically many generations called Campbell's Soups. Campbell's Soups has gone from adult soup drinking to children's soups. When we had the baby boom, it is back into adult market. It started on the taste as a platform for children. Now it goes for convenience, it goes for nutrition, it goes for everything. Health related even matters. Similarly, Cadillac, which was like Buick, a dying brand, but Cadillac totally revitalized. At one time, estimates were running that the average age of a Cadillac owner was in the late 60s to early 70s. They were loyal and they bought Cadillacs again and again, but the next generation was not picking up Cadillac as their brand. But today, it is totally different world. Cadillac has not only revitalized, gained its a position in the marketplace, but Cadillac brand, General Motors, is now able to take it all over the world as a premium brand, like a Lexus for Toyota, for example, or Infiniti for Nissan, and Acura for Honda, same kind of a thing. So brands are adaptable. And we have seen the latest change in McDonald's, which began primarily as a luncheon hamburger. Then they added French fries, and they call it, McFries, and they added the breakfast menu. They've gone worldwide, and now they're going after ethnic markets. The value proposition, because of the economic recession, no matter how you look at it, they have been able to adopt the brand. Message generally is that a brand that's a corporate brand is much more flexible because it stands for a more higher order abstract value that they offer to the marketplace, namely reputation, integrity, reliability, quality, etc. So I think that will be quite okay. And product brands, there may be some debates, but I'm not so sure. How do brands create value for companies? Brands create value both ways. One, they create economic value. And they do the economic value in two ways. One is they create net income or profit value. So the brand is very profitable, high margin, high volume if possible. But the brands have a second value which is even much more extraordinary. They create an asset value on the balance sheet. So they not only are income statement, but also balance sheet oriented asset, just like a factory, but much more valuable. Brands also create emotional value. In fact, brands are loved by their customers, by their employees, by the community, if the brands are highly respected and admired in the society. So we have seen this in sports where there's a tremendous amount of emotive bonding. People love their teams. And recently you saw Los Angeles Dodgers, which were not sustainable business. They were losing quite a lot. Suddenly several loyal people stepped up and said, we will offer $1 billion for that brand or for that sports franchise. And this is true for many of the soccer games, cricket clubs, just goes on and on. And again, we have seen brands can create tremendous emotional value, such as Harley Davidson. As a motorcycle, people who are owners and drivers are absolutely devotees of the product, which is Harley Davidson. There is even a hog room, Harley owners group, at every motorcycle dealer, Harley Davidson. I have been privileged to actually give a lecture in that room. When you go to them, it feels like a temple. Nothing but, cork boards. People put their, names and then their pictures, where they have traveled, little stories. I mean, you talk about the social media and the interactivity of today's Facebook. It is pretty much there except without the Facebook, essentially. And I'm sure by now they have gone into some sort of a social media online phenomenon. So brands create both values, and we need to therefore appreciate how these assets could be preserved like treasures in a museum, to be admired by people, but also the value goes up constantly. Where the brand that many people are very passionate is Patagonia. Generally, you create an enormous emotional value in a brand if the brand is rising above the notion of profit making. If it is a purpose-driven brand, it bonds emotively, emotionally to their stakeholders, customers, suppliers, community, and of course employees. So despite all this potential, why do brands plateau? We have seen many brands that have plateaued. Of course, we know successful brands are built to last. This year, Oreo actually celebrated 100-year anniversary. Same cookie with the same white cream inside and two black, outer things. It has a seal of its own. They have contemporarized over time, changed the ingredients, but the brand still has remained. And think about how many changes in society we have gone through in the American society in 100 years. All the way from an agricultural economy to post-industrial economy, and now we are moving on to knowledge economy. But there is a bonding that has taken place generations to generations about the brand called Oreo, which is fascinating. Same thing, Whirlpool in appliances. It's a brand that was created. Whirlpool was Upton Machine Company, primarily made products for Sears brand called Kenmore. They were like a private label manufacturers, an OEM as it is called, original equipment manufacturer in this business. Then they decided to start their own brand, Whirlpool, and as we all know, Whirlpool is a global brand, and it is able to actually survive and thrive in the toughest markets in the world by and large. And similarly, in the industrial products, Caterpillar is legendary. That brand came again in early 1900s or late 1800s when the earth-moving, earth equipment, agricultural equipment was an industry that was evolving, just like the automobile industry was evolving. There were hundreds of manufacturers. So Caterpillar and of course John Deere are the two surviving brands, and they have survived forever. So we know brands can last forever. Why do they plateau, therefore? Some brands do plateau. And their plateau, my view, is not by markets, but by managers. Many managers keep the brand as it is, rather than adjust, adapt over time to the changing environment, changing context. So here is a great brand, Yardley, in the aftershave lotion cologne market at a premium positioning, was a great brand. But eventually, whoever were managing the brand sold it to a private equity company, and brand is now getting revitalized worldwide by new set of companies or entrepreneurs. Industrially, there is a brand called Tektronix. That brand was considered the common brand, like IBM in computers, Xerox in duplicating machine. That was the brand for measuring in the engineering laboratories and factories, test and measurement company. Blue Box, analog technology. But somehow the company was not able to change its technology from analog to digital. HP came in and Tektronix basically ultimately had to sell itself to a private equity company. Right now, this is happening with a brand called Kenmore, the largest appliance brand in America forever, against General Electric, against all kinds of brands, including Whirlpool. Whirlpool makes that brand. Very fascinating that Kenmore brand is languishing right now. As you know, Kenmore is owned by Sears Roebuck. This is the days when the retailers created their own brands. And Sears has maybe 10, 12 world-class brands. All are languishing right now because of the management flux, because of, they don't know what to do with them. Each brand has an enormous asset value. If Kenmore could be therefore liberated from Sears stores and sold everywhere just like their competition, it can be easily revitalized. And the same company Sears has a brand called Craftsman Tools, which turns out to be a better brand than Toro in, lawnmowers, or Black & Decker, which are all respected brands in their own industries. It's very fascinating how Craftsman Tools brand is also languishing right now. So as I said, my view is that brands plateau not by markets, but more by managers. So most brands have enormous potential. Some of the best brands of today, as I mentioned, were actually started or were offered more than 100 years ago. We talked about Oreo, we talked about Whirlpool, Caterpillar, but also Coca-Cola, for example. The job of the brand managers is to get the most out of the brand. And this lecture is primarily designed to get more out of the brands, essentially. And therefore, brands have 9 lives, actually 9+ lives. We don't know how many more. I think it's forever. So how do you get the most out of your brand? So I looked at the whole literature. There are hundreds and hundreds of articles, academic research. There are textbooks in this area. And there are, of course, many industry research and reports, company research and reports. You have things in Wall Street Journal, you may have things in Bloomberg Business Week, you have things in Economist, etc. And today, it is very easy to gather the information and put them and synthesize them, which is what I enjoy doing it. So I believe that brands can be revitalized. You can get more out of the brand by 4 different ways. One is what I call brand variation strategy. Other one is a brand expansion strategy. Third one is a brand extension strategy. And the fourth one is a brand repositioning. In the literature, generally, there is a much more discussion, writing, findings on brand extension as a debate point. Can you extend the brand beyond the product for which it was originally associated with? And there's a lot of research going on in that area. Nowadays, a lot more quantitative modeling kind of an approach. But my view is that in this potential of a brand is much bigger than that, and hence 4 different ways. So let's go into each one of them. The first one is a brand variation. And the best of the companies finally have considered that I can vary the brand by offering different products under the same brand where the ingredient is changing. And of course, the most famous example is Coca-Cola, because they had the courage to call Diet Coke diet product as a Diet Coke, rather than the original brand name called Tab, which didn't do very well when Diet Colas were actually discovered, invented by RC Cola. And today, Diet Coke is number 2 brand in the world after Coca-Cola. And Pepsi has become number 3 brand in terms of total sales and revenue, etc. Same thing, Lay's potato chips, which is owned by Pepsi Corporation, has tremendous variety. Have you seen how many different flavors of potato chips can you get? So you change the flavors, seasoning, whatever it is, and you offer a whole variety, and you dominate the aisle in the process in a retail store pretty much. So ingredient variation is my favorite among brand variations. And you can offer the same brand with different ingredients, even if the brand is identified with a given ingredient. So there is a brand at Wipro in toilet soap, which is called Santoor, Santoor. It was identified with primarily one historical or Ayurvedic or the old tradition ingredient. Did a great job of succeeding. It is popular in some subcultures of India. But today Santoor as a brand has become generic in the sense that the brand is available in any format, any ingredient, including, let's say, cream as opposed to this ingredient, etc. It just goes on. Next area is product variation. And Canon, Nikon, most Japanese companies you have seen in consumer electronics, you offer a whole range of products under the same brand name. So Canon offers digital cameras, clearly for the consumer market almost disposable, and could be priced as low as under $100 and goes all the way to the professional market under the same name Canon. And this would be considered unprecedented if you were primarily a believer in having a house of brands as opposed to believing in branded house. And Marriott Hotels took the same courage. They originally started with a courtyard, but they put the word by Marriott. Now it's just basically called Marriott Courtyard. They started other brand names primarily, but Marriott is the common phenomenon. They have Marriott Suites, for example, Marriott, whatever else they offer. And they again took a lot of discussion, debates, and were able to show that taking the Marriott brand is more like assurance, more like service, or whatever seems to be appropriate in the hospitality industry, a well-managed property. And of course, in their case, the brand is equally important for the franchisee as it is important for the guests who come to stay at that particular hotel, by and large. The third brand variation one can do is price variation, which is so common. Every company does it. Airlines do enormous price variation between business class, first class, and economy. Now they've added like a super economy, little more legroom, little more service, whatever it is. Hotels, as we talked about, can do enormous price range in the same location, same hotel, and therefore some customers go for lower priced. Corporate prices are different than individual prices, just goes on and on. And FedEx will do the same thing, primarily with a sense of urgency, whether you want it to be delivered the same day, next day, etc. So FedEx does the price variation on the same offering essentially. Place variation, where you take advantage of the location differences, or this would be distribution. In fact, if you look at it, what I've done is to organize this material into what we call traditionally 4 P's of marketing: product, price, promotion, place. Price basically is channel management. And Seiko Watch has done a fantastic job. Watch will be still Seiko, but very high-priced watch will be in the jewelers' shops. Then will come to the premium department stores. Then they will come to the value mass merchandiser department stores like Walmart or Target. And of course, they may even go all the way to drugstores, for example, or even maybe grocery stores. This is a whole range, but what they do is that they do not offer certain price and styles in each channel. So they segment the market by channels, and therefore they do channel variation or place variation. There are 2 more. One is a promotion variation, which is the standard thing we do about positioning the brand differently in different markets. So you may have different appeal in one market compared to other market. Nintendo, which is a video game player, essentially like a PlayStation 2, for example, or Xbox. Nintendo does different positioning for different segments in the marketplace. So they will position Nintendo for the senior citizens more for exercise. The Wii, which is a sub-product category they have under Nintendo, is promoted accordingly. For children, it will be very different positioning. And I can see the same thing MetLife doing it in the life insurance business for different ethnic groups. What appeals to Asians in life insurance may not be the same as what appeals to the white majority in America, or to the Hispanics, or to the African Americans. And they vary that enormously, both by channel, the agents, but also the message they give. And the last variation out of the 4 P's model we can create is a service variation. The level of service you offer and you price differently accordingly. Also, you can change and segment the market. So extended warranties is clearly one. And after-sale services are the 2 areas where you have provided an enormous variation of what you offer, but brand is the same. And it's very possible. So one key way of getting more life out of a brand, or creating 9 lives of the brand, in order to grow the brand, create more excitement, is to use the traditional 4 P's of marketing, and I call that as brand variation. Second approach is brand expansion. Can the brands be taken as they are without modification at the brand level, not at the product level, again, all over the world? And the examples are pretty much there with the globalizing economy since the 90s, the WTO regulations coming where there are less trade barriers, less tariffs. It is no longer necessary to create country-by-country brands. People are rising above their own cultures more and more and seeking global brands. So Starbucks has clearly shown when they go to China, they don't have to change the name. Actually, Starbucks is much more a premium name in Asia as compared to even US. Huawei Technologies in industrial products is basically a telecom infrastructure company, same thing. They use the word Huawei as they go to other emerging markets such as Africa, India, but also in fact in advanced countries. So reverse is possible that an emerging multinational from emerging economy actually can use the same brand in advanced countries as advanced countries use the brand into emerging markets. The second major way to expand the brand is to think of institutional markets. If the brand is a consumer packaged goods brand, CPG, they probably have a commercial market or an institutional market. And of course, Coca-Cola has a very large institutional market, commercial market, and their largest customer always has been McDonald's. All quick service restaurants or fast food chains, they serve Coca-Cola. It is called the fountain business. And these accounts are pretty large scale and global in nature, such as McDonald's, for example, or Wendy's, or whatever the accounts are. Essentially fascinating to watch that, right? Burger King was another account in that industry, but it does not have to be limited to the hamburger, but it can be something that you can incorporate, let's say, for chicken places. So Chick-fil-A or whatever the other chicken companies will be, right? As I mentioned, Whirlpool has not only consumer market, but also supply to the apartment complexes, property managers, a rental market, for example. That's all commercial market. Maybe on the government, government is a very large buyer of many things for their military. And you have these military stores, basically military locations, and therefore they supply into that. That's all industrial commercial side. And Kimberly-Clark, with the brand name Kleenex that we are also familiar with, has the same thing, a very large institutional market division that caters to institutions like hospitals, institutions such as, for example, motels, institutions such as, for example, corporations, which is different than the consumer product. So brands can be expanded through international markets and institutional markets. The third way to expand is to take advantage of different locations, as we talked about earlier. So in this particular case, for example, you have the Kaiser Permanente that basically began as an HMO. That's a self-contained group primarily, as opposed to going for a group insurance. They have their own insurance area, and they began to offer in California for the Kaiser steel mills, I guess, whatever the Kaiser company was at one time. And Kaiser Permanente then began to be a separate entity. Today they are all over the country. Similarly, hospitals have done the same thing, that they have geographically expanded into other places. Mayo Clinic, rather than being strictly remaining in Rochester, Minnesota, has a great, in fact, facility in Arizona, in Tempe, Arizona, in Phoenix, as well as in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida. And they can expand to other locations as a way of growing the brand. And same Mayo brand rides every place. Next one, of course, is time-based. And of course, on time-based, we have an enormous amount of internet marketing on the one hand, but also online offerings. Mobility is the next platform. And we all know quite a lot about this area, which basically says it makes the transaction independent of time. You provide the flexibility for the customers to order, get information, interact anytime, anywhere, anyhow, kind of a notion. And as we become more and more web-based, you get a standardization of the technology. So I can do the transaction from my PC, from my home television. I can do it from my laptop. I can do it, in fact, from my iPad. I can do it from any device, my mobile telephones, etc. So that begins to allow the more flexibility, and you can grow the brand accordingly. We can expand the brand. And the last area I want to talk about is vertical markets. In IT industry, Cognizant is one of the better companies out of India, very similar to Wipro, Tata Consultancy Groups, etc. And all of these companies have vertical markets. For example, IT services in financial and banking sector is very different because of the rules and regulations as compared to the healthcare segment, as compared to the enterprise market, as compared to any other market. So you begin to create vertical markets as a way of growing the brand from one vertical market where you might have specialized to adding others, but brand remains the same, Cognizant in this case. And McDonald's has done a fantastic job, not only about providing the value pricing because of the economic recession, but has really gone in a very systematic way into different ethnic markets in the US. And that has given them a huge advantage to enter India very successfully, where most other quick service restaurants have failed. And people think it's a cultural thing. But in India, McDonald's, of course, does not offer a beef hamburger at all, but can offer a vegetable hamburger, can offer chicken, can offer Indian varieties, whatever it is. And now they're learning quite a lot. As they learn to do business in China, they're bringing some of their cuisines, recipes, or practices into America, as it is true from India, for example. And CNN, again, Atlanta-based company, started with a 24-hour news cycle. Then that's a CNN headlines. Then they have a CNN itself, CNN International, and they have many, many more varieties under Turner broadcast system. So Warner vertical markets is another major way to really, in fact, expand the brand. The third area with which you can get 9 lives of a brand is brand extension. As I mentioned earlier, this is probably the one that more research has been done. And of course, the more research, more the controversy, more the inconclusive findings. I lean toward the view that brands can be extended anywhere. So I lean toward one side, and I take the example of Japanese corporations. If Mitsubishi can put its brand name on chemicals, to shipbuilding, to consumer electronics, to bank, we should be able to do it. Of course, there are certain niche specialty brands that you may want to keep it as they are rather than extend them, unless you want to position them more as value brands. So Rolex watch, for example, BMW in automobiles, those kinds of things. But I generally believe that brands could be extended practically anywhere, any place, and therefore brand extension means taking the brand and putting that on a different product altogether. Not a variation, but totally different product category. So Kevlar clearly is one of those materials that DuPont invented, like nylon, and it has gone into so many new applications under the brand name Kevlar. Originally, it was designed primarily for the automotive sector, tire makers, because when we came out with steel belting radial technology, steel was adding a lot of weight. And during the first energy crisis of 74 to 78, government mandated more and more energy efficiency requirements in automobiles, as they are doing it now. And in the process, they went to their own suppliers and simply said, how can you create the strength of the radial, but of course at the same time the lightness and the weight? So Kevlar is as strong as steel, but as light as a fabric. Masterful invention. Unfortunately, Kevlar could not find a market in the tire business because it's a very commodity, low margin, high volume business. So Kevlar immediately identified bulletproof vests, or in the aerospace industry to make, in fact, the body frame, primarily the fuselage as it is called, or the wings. Make light material. The latest Dreamliner Boeing aircraft 787 has lots of those composite materials, as they are called. All began their journey with Kevlar as the first major innovation. They have gone into so many different applications using the same name, Kevlar, and the same company, DuPont. As I've talked about many times now, Arm & Hammer is a classic case in baking soda. And they've probably gone into 22 different applications, and they're always discovering new applications, but it is under the brand name Arm & Hammer every place. So new applications is the way you can extend the product into different markets, into different product categories where you are competing with different competitors. So Arm & Hammer, for example, competes in the toothpaste market with Colgate and Procter & Gamble. It competes, on the other hand, in the odor killing market with other pet stores, or pet market competitors. It competes, in fact, with odor killing in the refrigerator for another set of competitors. It's very possible. So new applications means you are competing with different competitors, and they have their own brand advantage. But despite all this, you can extend the brand into new product categories. I also think that not only new applications, but new product categories, as Apple has clearly shown. Apple creates the iPhone, then iPad first, then iPhone, then iPad now. So pod, phone, pad, all these things. And AT&T as a brand has extended itself from telecommunications to actually television or cable side by offering UVerse under AT&T brand name. It just goes on. I can just give you a few examples just to sensitize that one can extend the brand to other product categories. And as I said, my belief is that brands are versatile, they are stretchable, they are moldable, and therefore there is no real association in the minds of the companies that the brand cannot be used for certain usages. Now, there are some limits, I agree. For example, if you are a brand in a pesticide company, can you extend it to something that the humans as an edible product? There will be some debate, I can understand. But even there, I will take the stand that brand can rise above those differences, because brands are independent of the product, is the main message, right? Third one is the brands can be easily extended to complementary products. So Colgate starts with the toothpaste, different competitors in the toothbrush market. Colgate has now become a dominant toothbrush maker also under the Colgate brand name. We have seen the same thing in flat screen television. Same television makers, Korean, Japanese, whoever they are, put the same name as Philips does out of Europe across all of the consumer electronics products. McDonald's, as we talked about again, they offer complementary products, hamburger to salads, to French fries, to milkshakes, and nowadays they're adding many more varieties, including chicken and other things, but the name is still McDonald's, and they can extend into complementary products in some fashion. In fact, McDonald's creates a whole meal phenomenon in the process. They've gone into the breakfast market. It just goes on and on. Substitute products. In other words, you are in one industry or one technology and somebody else comes out with another technology and you would like to go there to preempt them taking your market away, especially if it's a disruptive technology. And we have seen this thing in cell phones when the smartphones begin to take more and more market away from the basic phones. So same companies like Samsung have jumped into that one. And now today, obviously, the tablet markets are taking markets away from computers. So computer companies are going into substitute products with the same brand name, whatever the brand names they are using for the computer business. Last area around it is co-branding the product. It is very possible to extend the brand by associating with other brand and marketing it jointly. We have seen in the airline business, because of the whole alliances on a global basis, especially for international flights, you see co-branding very common, which is primarily through code-sharing mechanisms. So you have the, for example, the Star Alliance, very large one. You have the Delta Sky Team Alliance. You have also at the same time the One World Alliance, and the world carriers join the consortium and lend their brand names as a code sharing. So same flight has two different brand names. Amex has done a great job with restaurants as well as with merchants. Merchant brand and your brand, such as a department store and Amex, for example. And of course, Yum Brands, which was a spin-off from Pepsi, consisted of 3 brands, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC. And what they've done is to now co-market, not only co-locate, but advertise in the same advertisement all 3 brands together. So brands actually can be extended everywhere, and here are some of the strategies that I have discovered from the literature. Last area, and the one that's more exciting for me, is brand repositioning. It's like a voodoo magic. Brand was one way, and suddenly some creative person changed it and became great magic. It's like David Copperfield, totally coming and with like a magician coming things out of a brand that nobody would imagine would be possible. Usually they are brand repositioning. And one of the key areas is lifestyle repositioning. In other words, brand becomes more a lifestyle representation, gives you much broader umbrella, and in the process, therefore, you can offer many product categories. In fact, as many as you like, fitting into that lifestyle. So Harley Davidson has become a lifestyle brand. Montblanc has become a lifestyle brand. Nike has become a lifestyle brand, and they reposition accordingly and get more out of the same brand which they historically were anchored to a given product. Design repositioning. If you are a design company and you have a good reputation like Swatch Watch, then Swatch Watch goes into, surprisingly of all things, an automobile in collaboration with Daimler-Benz or Mercedes-Benz, and they came out with a small car because they have an expertise or what is called core competency in design. Porsche has done the same thing. From automobile design, they have great designers, and they have liberated the designers from strictly automobile to other product lines. So design repositioning. Then designer repositioning. And we have seen this with world-class designers. They may have started with one product, let's say primarily for the apparel or a fashion design, but then they may have gone into household products. They would have gone even into industrial products, interestingly. And obviously one of the best known is Ralph Lauren, who has gone into so many different product lines by getting the creativity, offering as a designer his or her viewpoint into that product and coming out with some differentiation or some differential advantage. And Calvin Klein has done the same thing. And there are many more other great designers, including the new age designers who are coming in place. Quite a lot of artists are getting into this business from their non-commercial to a commercial activity, and you see a fantastic positioning done by basically a celebrity now. Whether those are celebrity chefs, or whether those are celebrity, Hollywood people, or those are celebrities made on YouTube nowadays, right? Have you seen how YouTube makes you celebrity? Very similar to America, several programs like the American Idol, where there are a bunch of talented people, but somebody has to discover you like a good agent. Today, social media is your best agent as opposed to a real agent kind of a notion. Next one is the one that I wanted to talk about, which is image repositioning. And of course, the classic case studies are raisins and prunes. In the US, people were avoiding them because wrinkles on those products reminds them of old age. There was a negative association. And what the California Growers Association did was to disassociate the negative connotations and create totally different image. Today, prunes are called dried plums. They are very good for the aging population as your natural laxative. At one time that was considered negative, today it is mainstream acceptance. My favorite, as I mentioned earlier, is Pabst Blue Ribbon. I think it's 1884. In China, they have introduced that, offer it in a bottle like a scotch, claim that they are actually aging the beer in a casket with certain precious woods. And you know how much they are charging? $44 per bottle of beer. Unthinkable. You could easily get a pack of 6-pack of beer in this country with the same brand name, probably under $10. Think about each bottle charging $44 because they've done a fantastic job of creating a new image altogether about this as an exclusive. And by the way, in both hard liquor, like a scotch, as well as in fact in wine business, as well as in fact in beer business, this is the most exciting part of shaping the image about the product in a very different way, and therefore you can reposition the brand altogether. And of course, most of the places we see retro brands coming back. This is always the case. As I have said in my other lectures, anything we give up as a daily necessity or a livelihood always comes back as a hobby business. Hunting. During hunter and gatherer days, that's what we did daily. Fishing, gardening, baking breads. And many of the brands that might have died are coming back as sort of the hobby brands. They're called retro brands. They're revitalized. And there are lots of examples. I mean, in beer, we already talked about the Pabst Blue Ribbon, and there are many other brands the same way. And the next area is a corporate repositioning. That means you are repositioning the name of the company into other spaces or liberate the company from the product. And my best example is AT&T. At the time of the breakup, the Bell system, Nobody knew AT&T by name because AT&T was primarily a financial brand meant for Wall Street people. It was the company that raised capital. Consumers and employees identified with the Bell system and with the Bell logo. According to the divestiture rules regulations, the judge ruled that the Bell name goes with the baby bells, as we call them, not with AT&T. AT&T, if you spell it out, made no sense anymore for the future. American, AT&T wanted to be global. Telephone, they wanted to be more in data and eventually video, not telephone, which is voice, analog technology. And of course, telegraph, which was already not there. So the origin where they began, they were able to take the name, have a shareholder approval that it will be never spelled out, even in legal documents. The name of the company itself is AT&T. They put a new logo behind, which is like a globe, and the rest is history. As Baby Bells began to consolidate, last of the Baby Bells bought AT&T primarily, or one main reason was its brand, which was already known all over the world. So AT&T brand, and by the way, they invested to create that brand because very few people knew it. Less than 10% of the average public knew AT&T by name, and more than 50% of that mistook that for ITT. And ITT was very big in Latin America. In Chile, there was an accusation that the company was involved in the assassination of the leader of the nation, Allende or some such name was there, and obviously AT&T got nasty calls. So AT&T repositioned its brand by investing almost $1 billion a year for the next 10 years, and it became, like Coca-Cola, almost a household brand. AT&T Wireless, same thing, used to be called Singular. It changed to AT&T Wireless or AT&T Mobility, for example. Xerox, the same thing. Great corporate repositioning, because the traditional duplication business is just not growing as fast. Huge Japanese competition also in that business. Companies like Canon and other companies are also having enormous presence. So Xerox has repositioned as primarily, in fact, a document company. And they are constantly advertising, promoting that we are no longer doing just these xerography or copying machines or duplicating machines, but we are basically a service provider actually. And IBM, the same thing, from the blue box mainframe computing. They went into the servers, obviously, but today IBM is identified for its global services business. So a manufacturer goes into the services, and primarily a domestic brand in many ways, even though it was international. But in emerging markets, IBM is going a big way under the same name, IBM. So corporate repositioning is one more way of repositioning the brand and get one more life out of the brand, essentially. It all sounds great. Conceptually, it makes sense. These are actual case studies of companies, and therefore they are real case histories, and therefore they were implemented successfully. But still, this is a journey with lots of minefields. And there are a bunch of reasons why any kind of a brand revitalization or stretching the brand outside of its association where it grew can create problems. And I have analyzed hundreds and hundreds of these failures of brand expansion, brand extension, brand variation, brand repositioning, and I have put them into a structure again. One of the first reasons any one of these initiatives to get one more life after the brand fails is that they went into a product category where there was already an entrenched competitor. So Xerox, when it went to the computer business, IBM was waiting, kill them. IBM similarly could not get into the duplicating machine business. They tried, printers business. Interesting. Second one, and more commonly, is that there was a poor market potential for that new product or for that new industry. So a lesson basically says that if you have a brand, extend it to another mature product category and take a share away from existing vendors or existing suppliers. But if you're going to go into a new product category altogether, it may have nothing to do with the brand extension or brand expansion, but it has to do that there is no potential. So many ingredient variations, you think that other ingredient would be positive to the society, but society doesn't accept that for some reason, and therefore it's just poor market potential. One example I have is duck in the box. People thought that more and more, since access to the primary care was getting so difficult, that there would be need for urgent care in the neighborhoods, and the early initiatives in the 80s all failed. It used to be called duck in a box. There was one company that had 800 locations. After expanding like that with capital they borrowed or got it from investors, they died. Lack of commitment, which is a very key problem. Often when you take a brand which is in the core business and take it into other product categories, the management doesn't commit enough resources. It's too much of a gamble. And this used to be the case for I don't know how many years now for emerging markets. I just don't want to go to Africa. No, I don't want to go to India. China as a communist country is just not worth the hassle. So today, those were peripheral markets, you did not invest in it enough, and therefore you failed. But today, those are becoming the core markets. A lot more commitment is made by everybody, as we have talked about in other sessions. And therefore, third reason why when a brand extension, expansion fails, I find, or repositioning, I find it was lack of commitment essentially for the change. Next area is just poor execution. There is a supply chain involved if you go into new product categories. And that supply chain just may not work. For example, automobile companies like Mercedes-Benz found that they could not do well in a small car because you have other set of suppliers and they were not as reliable, or they did not put a supply chain in place. As we have experienced recently about the GE's Dreamliner, where they began to outsource quite a lot on a worldwide basis, and just coordinating and providing a supply chain delayed the aircraft manufacturing for so many years. So it has nothing to do with brand extension. It has to do just even in the same business not being able to execute. So .com companies had the problem. They were all basically vaporware, as we used to call, a great, in fact, a website maybe, PowerPoint presentations. Investors, venture capitalists got excited. Most of the .com companies became .com bust, as it is called, or .bust by and large in the early 2000, 2001 kind of a thing. Often when you go from one place to the other, taking the same brand, the failure arises because of the channel conflict. And a typical one I've seen is that when an OEM company goes into a distributor-oriented end-user market, the OEM customer just does not like it. I talked about Whirlpool. Whirlpool was a captive supplier to Kenmore brand owned by Sears. Sears was an investor in Whirlpool actually. And it took many negotiations before Kenmore or Sears allowed Whirlpool to start its own brand called Whirlpool, by showing that the two will not compete but grow the total market. And it has worked well for them, but generally this creates channel conflict, especially in a B2B market, or the channel conflict between your direct sales force as opposed to a distributor, or direct sales force versus online ordering, typical channel conflict. Technical issues. Quite often, another product category, you are just not as good in discovery process. So in drugs, you may be a great brand in oral analgesics, for example. You may be a great brand in injectable antibiotics. But as you go toward diabetes, as you go toward other diseases, you just may not be able to discover it right. Your scientific knowledge limits, and therefore the brand fails. Had nothing with the brand, had to do with technical performance of the product itself. So technical issues. Weak customer support. And I've experienced this myself. Despite all the training and education, the telephone people, installers, just did not know how to install data products and services. But even today, while they sell triple play under the same brand name. So a telephone company will say, we are in the wireless business, we are also in the broadband business, unfortunately, and maybe cable business, but they are not able to provide technical support. They all have specialists coming in, and one technician comes and the other goes, and you have nothing but a messy phenomenon quite often. I have personally experienced both with a cable company trying to offer me a telephone and an internet service, and with the telephone company trying to offer me a cable service. So it's just that, nothing to do with the branding again. So weak customer support, post-sales. Regulatory problems, this is very key. And as you saw, many banks during the liberalizing days of the 90s and the 2000s, we allowed banks to become universal banks. So banks could do insurance, banks could do brokerage, banks could do leverage, this whole structured instruments, and in real estate, leverage, etc. And that universal banking failed. We had a massive bank failure. The biggest of the banks failed. Government had to bail them out by loaning money, buying their shares or whatever they did. As it is happening in the European theater right now, began with Ireland, Iceland, Greece, now Spain, tomorrow maybe France, we don't know. Too much leverage. So now new regulations are coming where the banks are not allowed to go into other businesses or create a Chinese wall between the two. And therefore, often regulatory problems are the reason why they fail more so than the brand name by and large. Next area, of course, point number 9 is bad business cycle, which is obvious. When the whole economy is going down with the deep economic recession of 2008, or the Great Depression of 1929, or the stagflation of 1980s, there is just not market. So the brand fails into a new product opportunity, into a new segment opportunity, but there is no buying power. Has nothing to do with the brand. During good times, they were done quite well. And the last one is lack of value. As you know, we try to promote very heavily the notion of relationship marketing, not only loyalty programs, but I can now, because I have a relationship, I can do the cross-sell and upsell. Many financial services, wealth management companies went into that. So you start, let's say, with an insurance product, but then you offer a brokerage product, then you offer an annuity product of some sort, just goes on. And often what you find is that there is just not value. Customer sees through. He or she does not perceive the value of buying different products from the same company, has nothing with the branding again. So we need to watch out for 10 things as we try to liberate the brand from product and make it independent of the product. And those are the 10 things that I just talked about. So let me conclude. Brands are like cats. They are independent, they are resilient, they are versatile and adaptable to changing environment. And if you want, you can add, cats are actually very finicky if you wanted to add that thing. Brands are very sensitive. You can add other adjectives that I don't know. But this came from my research on 9 lives of cats, and that's how I put the title. But at least these 4 characteristics are very key between the cats and the brands. Brands create both economic and emotional value, as I mentioned earlier, with probably emotional value having a lot greater valuation, like the Apple brand, which has become highest valued brand, of course, highest corporation, crossed $500 billion in valuation, and people thought it will plateau. It just goes on continuing, increasing more value, because people have both economic value, investors have economic value and also emotional value they're getting. Brands plateau when managers are unwilling or unable to adapt. Like any failure. I did a whole research on why good companies fail, and I have a whole book called Self-Destructive Habits of Good Companies and how to break those habits. And the first lesson that came out was, when a company is unable or unwilling to change, it is likely to, especially when the external environment has changed dramatically, is likely not to survive. That is true of brand and brand managers. Many brand managers are so religious about the way the brand is created, the way the brand is nurtured, the way brand is maintained, they don't want to take any risks with them. And in the process, of course, they keep the brand as a legacy brand. Usually the brand fails, a private equity company buys out, gets the cost out of the brand, and then resells the brand to somebody else who makes enormous money. You might remember Remington Shavers, world-class brand, plateaued. went into private equity. One of the entrepreneurs bought the brand and totally revitalized it. I mean, I can give you hundreds of these examples. Getting more from the brand is not just a nice thing to do anymore. It is becoming a necessity. And the reason is high cost of new brand introductions, combined with failure of new brands. You have a double jeopardy. So existing brands have an enormous value, enormous potential to create more value, and therefore somehow revitalizing existing brands or liberating the brand from the product, creating 9 lives out of the brand, all becomes very much a necessity now. And as I mentioned, there are 4 ways companies can get more from their brands. Brand variation, ingredient, product, the 4 P's of marketing. Brand expansion into international, institutional, complementary, etc. markets. Brand extension, as we talked about, into substitute products, complementary products, new applications, whatever they are. And my favorite is brand repositioning, where you get these fantastic stories that you can't believe the power of marketing. Marketing can create enormous value for the company and maybe for the society for that matter, if we do the right job. And by the way, brand creation, brand vitalization is not limited to for-profit companies, but some of the best brands in the world actually are NGO brands. Peace Corps, Olympics. I can go on giving you. And of course, the best brands in the world always have been religion brands. There is nothing like emotional bonding with a brand than your religion. So brands have an enormous universality outside of the traditional CPG brand-oriented marketing. I hope you have enjoyed this session. Thank you very much.